Along Florida's Space Coast on the Atlantic Ocean, much of the attention is focused on flight and rockets lifting off from Kennedy Space Center and Cape Canaveral. But nearby, scientists have a much more terrestrial concern: how to preserve a once thriving population of oysters, vital to the health of one of the state's most ecologically important waterways. Their effort is being complicated by climate change. Lonnie Quinn reports.
This is Mosquito Lagoon. It is a picture of tranquility. Dolphins swimming by and wading birds just watching over things.
Many say it is the most biologically diverse estuary on the mainland United States.
Linda Walters would know. The University of Central Florida professor has been studying these waters for 24 years with a focus on the eastern oyster.
They're superstars. There is no question about that. They can handle all sorts of climatic conditions.
Do you think people around the world don't have an appreciation for an oyster?
I think everybody could do a little bit better in appreciating oysters.
They're not the prettiest animal in the ocean.
They don't have to be pretty, they just have to do a really important job.
That job is filtering water. Yes, they look like rocks, but these are actually clusters of oysters. And each oyster sucks in 20 gallons of water every day filled with algae and muck, and eventually spits out cleaner and clearer water.
Everybody should care about oysters. It's just that simple. They are one of the most important species on this planet for keeping our water clean.
I see why you told me to wear an old pair of sneakers. These things are like razor blades.
Since 1943, Mosquito Lagoon has lost 40% of its oyster reefs within the boundaries of Canaveral National Seashore. Much of that due to boat wakes that dislodge the oysters.
I see the healthy part of the oyster reef, which is this dark color.
Yep.
And right here where it's white, this is dead, correct?
That's dead, and that's boat wake impacts.
Walters had to help. She and her team have restored more than 6% of the reefs. But now, there's a new threat. Mangroves are encroaching, the consequence of warming waters.
It gets probably close to 95, 96 in these sorts of, shallow areas.
Let me tell you, Linda, we put bubbles in here, we got a jacuzzi.
And that's how the mangrove trees prefer it. Red mangroves will die when the air temperatures dip below 24 degrees. That's known as a hard freeze, and it prevents the trees from moving to the north. But this area has not had one of those in decades.
Now, over the last 20 years, the oysters and the mangroves are competing for the same land, and the oysters are losing that battle. This is a dead reef, but the mangroves, they have blown up. They have gone up by 198%.
Now, that may not be a bad thing. Mangroves remove carbon from the air. They also provide a buffer during storms. But in this turf war, Professor Walters is rooting for the oyster.
So in terms of climate change, we always talk about the average mean temperature increasing, but for you, you're focusing on that morning low temperature not getting down as cold as it's been in the past.
Yeah, that is a new field of research that's called tropicalization, and we're finding it for lots of plants, lots of animals.
A single mangrove tree produces hundreds to thousands of propagules. These are pre-germinated seeds that look a little like a green bean. They float on the water and can root on an oyster reef.
What you can see right here is a new propagule. So this would have just shown up here and gotten trapped amongst these clusters probably within the last 2 weeks. And this other one here is probably 20 years old at this point. And you can see that other new mangroves are starting to grow right underneath this. They're just going to take up more and more of the oyster reef as they all start growing.
It looks like they coexist nicely, but the mangroves may be causing the oysters to die off. UCF graduate student Catherine Harris says it's likely it has something to do with the chemistry of the trees.
Mangroves basically contribute to much more acidic levels in the sediment, and over time that maybe starts to dissolve the oyster shells and weaken the shells, which makes the base that the oysters will grow on go away.
One solution is for man to step in and make more bases. This restored reef is a series of grids that are made, believe it or not, from potato chip waste.
So that's made out of potatoes.
That's made out of potatoes. It is a starch material that is considered a bioplastic.
And these containers, they shore up the reef. Each one is filled with about 30 pounds of recycled oyster shells from restaurants.
So we're keeping all of the oysters out of landfills while creating new oyster habitats and putting them back out into the lagoon.
Jesse Wales of the Marine Discovery Center says the recycled oyster shells act like a magnet and attract tiny baby oysters to latch on.
Since oysters are made out of calcium carbonate, as they leach off that calcium carbonate, baby oysters can sense it in the water, and they will actually find these oyster bags and attach onto them.
Now, what pile are we digging from?
It's a simple process that kind of doubles as cardio.
Go ahead and dump that baby right in. Keep shaking it out, tamp it on the ground, and we only need 1,399 more to go.
To date, the Marine Discovery Center has recycled more than 700,000 pounds of oyster shells.
So this entire back parking lot is going to be full of oyster bags by the time we're done.
The center also restored this marsh. Now, they intended for it to be a marsh grass nursery, but mangroves took over here too. They got so thick, we had to back out.
Where do the mangroves stop? Like, they don't go farther north than where?
If you look at a textbook that's like 10 years old, right here in Mosquito Lagoon used to be the stop point for mangroves. At least for one species of mangroves, red mangroves. And it used to be St. Augustine, which is about 70 miles north of here, for black mangroves. Now you see both species up into Georgia.
Where do you think they could be, let's say, 10 years from now?
10 years from now, I think North and South Carolina are going to have a lot more mangroves than they do now, which they pretty much have none right now. And you will see the propagules, the seeds, floating in the water much further north because they won't be dying on the way there.
Now, no one can say for sure what that will mean for coastal areas in the mid and the North Atlantic, but right here in Mosquito Lagoon, Professor Walters, she finds plenty of hope.
Well, with everything that's taking place out here and having spent my entire day with you, you haven't stopped smiling the whole day. For some reason, you feel good about things, not bad about things.
You know, if you're going to feel bad about it, you just have to find another job. There is so much willpower in the United States and around the globe to make our estuaries better. Lots of people want to understand the problem, they want to help the problem, and they want to correct it for the future generations.
Is it fair to call you the oyster whisperer?
For CBS This Morning Saturday,
I've been called the oyster lady before.
The oyster
and
lady's
I don't
good.
know whether that's nice or not.
Lonnie Quinn, Mosquito Lagoon, Florida.
Whenever we see stories like this, I'm so glad there are people that are so much smarter than I am
That's
to
right.
figure some of these things out.
I always thought mangroves were a good thing because they provided protection against these battering
They can be,
storms,
yes.
right?
Yes.
It's where they are, though.
Yeah.
That's what matters.
Oyster whisperer, I prefer oyster eater.
There
I
it
do
is.
as well.
Even
I like
better.
that, too. We'll
All
take
right.
that.